Welcome. As the night grows quieter, let your thoughts drift toward a distant moon called Pandora. This is not a story about heroes and villains, nor a simple struggle between good and evil. Avatar unfolds as a living mirror, one that reflects whoever dares to step inside it. As the timeline moves from the first encounter to the deeper conflicts that follow, the struggle shifts gently outward, then inward, until values themselves begin to fracture. Through what we call the Mirror of Ash, Pandora reveals how civilizations change when survival, power, and identity collide. If you enjoy these journeys, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell me where you're listening from, what time it is, and the topics you'd love to explore. Your thoughts may guide our next adventure. Pandora is often described as a wild frontier, a distant moon overflowing with untamed life. But that description is misleading. Pandora is not chaos, it is order, an order so deeply rooted in biology that it feels alive, aware, and quietly watchful. Every forest, reef, and mountain exists as part of a single self-regulating system. The land remembers, the air responds, the living world reacts when its balance is disturbed. Nothing on Pandora exists in isolation. Plants, animals, and the Na'vi themselves are woven into a planetary network where information flows as naturally as breath. This is not metaphor, it is function. Neural pathways run through roots, wings, and water, allowing the moon to sense change and adapt to it. Pandora does not wait for disaster to arrive. It detects imbalance early, like a body sensing infection, and prepares its response long before the threat becomes visible. At the center of this system is Iwa, often misunderstood as a deity. Iwa is not a god in the traditional sense. There is no judgment, no reward, no punishment. Iwa does not decide who is right or wrong. Instead, Iwa operates as a planetary-scale biological neural network, an immense living archive that stores memory, awareness, and evolutionary experience. Every life that connects to it adds another thread to an ever-growing web of shared existence. Iwa remembers generations, not as stories, but as data. Experiences are absorbed, patterns are recognized, and survival strategies are refined. Over time, this creates a form of intelligence that does not think in words, but in balance. When harmony is maintained, Iwa remains quiet. When disruption grows too severe, the system reacts, not out of anger, but necessity. This is why morality, as humans understand it, has little meaning on Pandora. The world does not reward kindness, nor does it condemn cruelty. What matters is integration. To survive here, a species must learn to fit within the larger rhythm of the biosphere. Those who adapt are absorbed into the system. Those who resist it are pushed back, sometimes gently, sometimes decisively. This is the core conflict explored throughout the Avatar timeline. It is not a war between good and evil, nor even between species. It is a struggle between two opposing philosophies, integration and exploitation. Integration means surrendering control, allowing oneself to become part of something larger, and accepting limits imposed by the living world. Exploitation, by contrast, seeks dominance, extracting value without regard for consequence, believing the system can be bent indefinitely without breaking. Pandora cannot be bent forever. It responds the same way any living organism would. When pressure exceeds tolerance, defenses activate. And as the timeline of Avatar unfolds, this truth becomes increasingly clear. Pandora is not a paradise meant to be conquered, nor a wilderness waiting to be tamed. It is a mirror, one that reflects the intentions of those who enter it and quietly decides whether they belong. The forest of the Omadakaya is not simply a place to live, it is a place that remembers. Beneath its towering canopies, Pandora slows its own heartbeat, inviting everything within it to move with patience rather than force. Light does not arrive all at once here. It filters gently through layers of leaves, branches, and vines, teaching life to exist in gradients rather than extremes. This is a vertical world. Survival is not measured by how far one can run, but by how well one can climb, cling, and remain balanced above the ground. Roots twist like living pathways, branches form natural bridges, and every ascent requires trust in one's body, in the forest, and in those climbing alongside you. Nothing here is designed for speed. Everything favors continuity. Scattered throughout this environment are what might be called biological memory nodes. The home tree once stood as a living archive, a place where generations gathered, not merely to shelter, but to remember who they were. Nearby, the Tree of Souls functions as something even deeper, a convergence point where individual lives reconnect with the collective memory of Pandora itself. These are not symbolic locations, they are functional centers of remembrance, where the past remains present and accessible. The biological pressures of the forest shape those who live within it. To survive here requires patience more than aggression. Paths are not always visible, and navigation depends on memory of routes, cycles, seasons, and signs passed down through generations. Coordination becomes essential. A single individual rarely thrives alone. Movement, hunting, and defense all rely on group awareness and shared rhythm. Because resources regenerate slowly, life in the forest does not explode outward. It grows inward and downward, layering itself over time. This favors stability over expansion and resilience over conquest. The forest teaches that survival is not about taking more, but about lasting longer. From these pressures emerges the culture of the Omadakaya. Tradition is not nostalgia, it is infrastructure. Rituals serve as anchors, ensuring that knowledge survives even when individuals do not. Ancestors are not distant figures of reverence, but active participants in daily life. Their experiences woven into decision-making and identity. Memory is not optional here, it is the foundation of existence. The individual within this system is inseparable from lineage. Identity is collective before it is personal. To know who you are means knowing where you come from, who stood before you, and what has already been lost. This creates a powerful sense of belonging, but also a deep resistance to change. Altering tradition is not seen as progress, but as risk. And me love hoped of times when the rebel. From this way of living emerges a distinct moral structure. Preservation is valued over expansion. Balance is favored over ambition. The old ways are trusted because they have already proven their ability to endure. Change, when it arrives too quickly, is treated with caution, even fear. Within the broader world of Avatar, the forest is the memory of Pandora. It is where the past is held gently, where stability is protected, and where the world quietly reminds its inhabitants that survival does not always belong to those who move fastest, but to those who remember how to stay. The Sea of the Metkayina moves differently from the forest. Where the jungle teaches memory and patience, the ocean teaches awareness. Here, the world is never still. Water shifts, light bends, and the horizon itself feels temporary. Life unfolds in 3 dimensions, without fixed ground or permanent shelter. There is no single place that can truly be called the center, only currents, passages, and moments of calm between movement. Everything in this environment exists within rhythm. Tides rise and fall, currents change direction without warning, even silence feels fluid, carried by the slow pulse of the sea. To live here is to accept that stability is fleeting. Nothing waits for you to catch up. Survival depends on sensing change the instant it arrives. The biological pressure of the ocean is immediate and unforgiving. Reflex matters more than strength. Awareness matters more than memory. The Metcaina must read subtle signs, the shift of water temperature, the angle of light beneath the surface, the behavior of surrounding life. Decisions are made in seconds, not generations. Timing becomes everything. A moment too late can mean being carried away, exposed or lost. Because of this, life in the sea does not accumulate slowly like the forest. It appears, disappears, and reappears in cycles that are constantly renewed. The ocean does not preserve traces of the past in the same way. What remains relevant is what works now. From this environment emerges a culture focused on function rather than history. Ritual exists, but it is lighter, less anchored to ancient lineage. Knowledge is practical, shared through experience and demonstration rather than long ceremonial transmission. Skills, swimming, navigating, hunting, cooperating are valued above stories. Myth still exists, but it does not dominate daily life. The Metcaina way of living is deeply shaped by coexistence with other forms of oceanic life. Survival is not achieved through dominance, but through relationship. Bonds with sea creatures are not symbolic gestures. They are essential alliances. Trust, timing, and mutual dependence replace rigid hierarchy. Life thrives not by standing above the system, but by moving with it. This shapes a moral structure that differs sharply from that of the forest. Flexibility is not weakness, it is intelligence. Change is not a threat, it is expected. When conditions shift, resistance only leads to harm. Adaptation becomes the highest virtue. Value is placed not on what has endured the longest, but on what continues to function. In this worldview, the present moment holds more weight than the past. Memory still matters, but it does not bind action. What matters most is whether one can respond to what is happening now. Survival is measured day by day, tide by tide, breath by breath. Within the broader tapestry of Avatar, the sea represents a different answer to Pandora's unspoken question. It suggests that harmony does not always mean preservation. Sometimes, harmony means letting go, allowing oneself to change shape, direction, and identity again and again as the world continues to move. The volcanic regions of Pandora exist at the edge of endurance. This is not a land that welcomes life. It tolerates it, briefly and at great cost. The ground is unstable, shaped by heat and pressure beneath the surface. Temperatures remain high, the air feels heavy, and the terrain offers little certainty. What appears solid may shift. What seems calm may change without warning. Here the world never fully rests. Unlike the forest or the sea, this environment offers almost no natural renewal. The soil is thin, exhausted, and slow to recover. Growth does not return easily once lost. Every step carries risk, and every shelter feels temporary. The landscape itself communicates a constant message: survival is not guaranteed, and comfort is an illusion. The biological pressure of this region is absolute. Life exists perpetually close to erasure. There are no gentle cycles, no predictable seasons that promise return. Each moment becomes a test. Only those capable of enduring extreme conditions continue forward, while others fade from the system. There is no space for prolonged weakness, no margin for error that lasts. Because of this, the idea of a safe life cycle never fully forms. Childhood is brief, dependency is dangerous, strength becomes not just an advantage, but a requirement. Survival favors those who can dominate their surroundings, impose order, and remove uncertainty before it spreads. From this relentless pressure emerges the culture of the Ash people. Their society does not grow from shared memory or cooperation, but from control. Power is not symbolic, it is practical. Hierarchies form quickly and rigidly because clarity of command reduces hesitation. Authority flows downward, enforced by visible strength rather than inherited tradition. In this culture, control is synonymous with safety. To hold power means to shape outcomes before the environment can turn hostile. Leadership is defined not by wisdom or harmony, but by the ability to impose direction. Those who cannot assert themselves risk being consumed by the instability around them. This worldview produces a distinct moral structure. Survival becomes the ultimate justification. Actions are measured not by their effect on balance, but by whether they ensure continued existence. Strength becomes truth because only strength appears to endure. Concepts like patience, restraint, or long-term harmony are often dismissed as luxuries that this land cannot afford. Balance, in particular, is seen as fragile. To wait for equilibrium is to invite collapse. In a place where the world itself threatens constantly, force feels like the only reliable language. Preservation gives way to dominance, and endurance replaces coexistence as the highest goal. Within the broader narrative of Avatar, the Ash people are not outsiders to Pandora. They are a consequence of it. They represent what happens when survival pressures erase the space for memory, renewal, and patience. They are not a contradiction to Iwa's system, but a reminder that balance, when stretched too far, can fracture into something harsher. In the land of ash and heat, Pandora reflects a difficult truth. When existence becomes nothing but survival, even a living world can give rise to values shaped by domination rather than harmony. The guardians of Pandora's earlier age are not defined by strength alone, but by memory. They are the ones who carry the weight of what the world once was, and who continue to measure every choice against what has already been lost. In the first 2 chapters of the Avatar timeline, this role is embodied most clearly through Jake Sully and Neytiri figures, shaped less by destiny and more by accumulated consequence. Jake Sully begins as an outsider, arriving on Pandora with a human way of seeing, fragmented, instrumental, and goal-oriented. At first, the world is something to be learned, navigated, and ultimately used. His transformation does not come through conquest, but through biological integration. By linking his body and awareness to Pandora's living systems, Jake learns to perceive the world as a whole rather than a collection of parts. Leadership, for him, is not claimed, it is imposed by circumstance and accepted through responsibility. Over time, however, that role changes. Jake is no longer a symbol of rebellion or upheaval. He becomes a stabilizing force, a keeper of order. His decisions are no longer driven by the urgency of resistance, but by the quieter fear of collapse. The central conflict he carries is no longer external, it is deeply personal. Every action must balance two competing instincts: to protect Pandora as a living ecosystem, and to protect his family as vulnerable individuals within it. In this tension, Jake embodies the cost of leadership after victory, when survival replaces revolution and preservation becomes heavier than hope. Neytiri represents a different, more intimate connection to Pandora. She is not someone who learned the world later in life. She is shaped by it from the beginning. Through her, Pandora's original rhythm is felt rather than explained. Memory, ancestry, and continuity woven directly into identity. Her bond with the land is not philosophical. It is emotional, inherited, and deeply personal. Loss defines her transformation. The destruction of her home, the death of loved ones, and the repeated fracturing of balance leave marks that do not fade. Where she once embodied harmony, she gradually shifts toward absolute defense. Protection hardens into vigilance. Restraint gives way to refusal. This is not cruelty, but exhaustion. Each loss reinforces the belief that compromise invites erasure. Together, Jake and Neytiri function as the root system of Pandora's resistance. Like roots, they stabilize the surface while anchoring it to the past. They prevent sudden collapse, holding the world together through experience and sacrifice. But roots, by nature, are slow to move. Their strength is also their limitation. They resist change. They harden over time. As guardians, they preserve the old balance, but struggle to imagine a new one. In the evolving world of Avatar, they stand at a quiet crossroads, essential for survival, yet increasingly distant from the transformations unfolding around them. They are the memory of Pandora, steady, protective, and at risk of becoming immovable. The next generation of Pandora does not simply inherit the world left behind by the Guardians. They alter it. These are not keepers of memory, but signals of change, branches growing in unexpected directions as the system itself begins to adapt. In the era of Avatar 2 and beyond, the future is no longer shaped by preservation alone, but by transformation. At the center of this shift stands Kiri. Her connection to Aiwa goes beyond anything previously observed among the Na'vi. She does not learn the world through ritual or repetition. She synchronizes with it. Awareness flows through her instinctively, as if the boundary between individual and system has thinned. This suggests a profound change within Pandora itself. Aiwa is no longer only storing memory and experience. Through Kiri, it appears to be adapting, testing new ways to interact with the physical world through living interfaces. Kiri's role is not one of command or prophecy. She does not lead by authority. Instead, she functions as a biological bridge, a point of contact where planetary consciousness and individual awareness overlap. Her existence implies that Pandora is experimenting, quietly and carefully, with evolution, not just of form but of perception. Through her, the system feels less static, more responsive, almost curious. Alongside her is Loak, a figure shaped by exclusion rather than connection. Within his own community, he is often viewed as misaligned, too impulsive, too different. Yet, it is precisely this marginal position that allows him to form bonds others cannot. His connection with creatures cast out or misunderstood mirrors his own status. In Loak, Pandora explores the value of those who do not fit established patterns. His journey expands the definition of belonging, community. In his experience is no longer determined by shared origin or tradition, but by mutual recognition. Through Loak, the boundaries between species soften. The idea of who deserves protection, respect, or alliance widens. He does not reinforce the old system, he stretches it, revealing its limitations and unspoken exclusions. Then there is Spider, perhaps the most complex signal of change. Spider is human, yet he does not belong to humanity in any meaningful way. Raised among the Na'vi, he carries their emotional imprint but lacks their biological connection. He cannot fully integrate with Pandora, yet he does not share the detachment of those who exploit it. Within him coexist two incompatible logics, industrial reasoning and ecological empathy. Spider's role is not to resolve this tension, but to inhabit it. He represents the possibility of a third path, one that neither dominates nor dissolves entirely. As a moral intermediary, he understands the costs and blind spots of both worlds. His presence suggests that reconciliation, if it comes, may not arise from purity or strength, but from contradiction. Together, Kiri, Loak, and Spider form the forward edge of Pandora's evolution. They do not protect the old balance, nor do they seek to destroy it. They test its flexibility. In the unfolding story of Avatar, this generation does not ask how to preserve the world as it was, but how it might continue to live, changed in what is yet to come. The Ash people are not intruders from beyond Pandora. They are born from it. They emerge when the system bends too far, when survival becomes relentless and balance begins to fracture. In them, Pandora reflects a version of itself, shaped by prolonged pressure, where adaptation no longer leads toward harmony, but toward control. Their origin is not defined by invasion, but by restructuring. Harsh environments, sustained scarcity, and cycles of unresolved loss reshape both body and worldview. Over time, survival ceases to be a shared effort and becomes an individual demand. Cooperation narrows. Memory loses priority. What remains is the urgent need to endure, moment by moment, without certainty that the system will recover. From this condition arises a distinct moral logic. Strength becomes the measure of existence. To endure is to prove worth. Control offers safety because uncertainty feels lethal in a world that rarely forgives hesitation. Power is not symbolic here. It is practical, immediate, and visible. Those who can impose order create brief islands of stability within chaos. Fire stands at the center of this worldview. Unlike the forest, which stores memory, or the sea, which dissolves and renews, fire consumes without returning. It leaves no archive. It does not preserve lineage. It erases traces, creating space not for rebirth, but for dominance. In this philosophy, the past is not a guide, it is a burden. Survival requires release, even if that release means destruction rather than renewal. Within Pandora's broader system, the Ash people function as an internal anomaly. They are not external threats to be expelled, but outcomes generated by the system itself. Their existence demonstrates a difficult truth. Awa does not guarantee harmony. It does not ensure kindness, nor does it prevent cruelty. Awa permits what can persist. Survival, not virtue, defines inclusion. This challenges the long-held belief that Pandora inherently favors balance and gentleness. Instead, the Ash people reveal that balance has limits. When pressures accumulate without relief, even a living world can give rise to values shaped by domination rather than coexistence. In this sense, they are not a failure of the system, but evidence of its neutrality. Symbolically, the Ash people serve as a mirror. They resemble humanity not in form, but in philosophy. The emphasis on strength, control, and survival at any cost reflects the same logic that drives industrial exploitation, only expressed through a Na'vi lens. This reflection forces a shift in the nature of conflict. The struggle is no longer between species, or even between nature and technology. Instead, the conflict becomes ideological. It centers on competing answers to a single question: what does survival justify? Is endurance achieved through integration or through dominance? Is control a temporary necessity or a permanent truth? In the evolving narrative of Avatar, the Ash people stand as a warning rather than an enemy. They show what Pandora can become when survival eclipses memory and when balance is replaced by force. Through them, the world reveals that the greatest threat is not invasion, but what emerges when a living system is pushed beyond its capacity to heal. Pandora does not exist as a landscape waiting to be explored. It functions as a unified organism. Forests, oceans, creatures, and even the air itself operate like interconnected organs within a single living body. Nothing is truly separate. Every disturbance ripples outward, and every response is shaped by the need to preserve the whole rather than any individual part. Within this system, perception comes first. Pandora continuously senses imbalance, subtle changes in energy flow, disruption of ecological patterns, unfamiliar frequencies moving through its networks. This awareness is not conscious in a human sense, but it is precise. Like a nervous system, it detects irregularities before they become catastrophic. A shift in the land, a sudden extraction, a foreign presence that does not synchronize. These signals register immediately. Once imbalance is detected, the system responds methodically. The source of disruption is identified, not by intent, but by impact. Pandora does not ask why something occurs. It only registers what effect it produces. If the disturbance spreads, the response escalates. Local reactions give way to systemic ones as biological processes align toward a single goal: containment. This response is entirely non-moral. Pandora does not punish. It does not forgive. Concepts such as justice, guilt, or mercy do not exist within its logic. There is only regulation. When a system threatens the integrity of the whole, countermeasures emerge naturally. Predators migrate, environments resist intrusion, and biological networks synchronize into defensive patterns. These reactions are not acts of judgment. They are functions of survival. The objective remains constant: maintain the viability of the entire biosphere. Individual suffering, species extinction, or cultural collapse are secondary to this goal. If sacrifice preserves the system, sacrifice is permitted. Pandora is not cruel, but it is indifferent to anything that does not contribute to collective endurance. Within this framework, humanity is perceived as an anomaly. Humans do not integrate biologically. They do not synchronize with the neural flow of the world. Their presence introduces disruption that spreads rapidly and does not self-correct. Extraction, industrial expansion, and technological dominance operate on principles external to Pandora's logic. Rather than adapting to the system, these actions attempt to override it. As a result, humans are treated as invasive agents, not enemies in a moral sense, but foreign elements whose impact exceeds tolerance thresholds. Their technology amplifies imbalance faster than the system can absorb. Once these thresholds are crossed, Pandora responds with increasing intensity, not out of hostility, but necessity. This distinction is crucial. Pandora is not defending itself against a villain, it is correcting an error. When responses intensify, it is because the system has determined that passive adaptation is no longer sufficient. What follows is not war, but immune reaction. Understanding this reframes the conflict at the heart of Avatar. The struggle is not between opposing sides with equal moral standing. It is between a living system and an incompatible force. Pandora does not seek victory, it seeks continuity. And in this continuity lies its most unsettling truth. If something cannot integrate, cannot adapt, and cannot reduce the harm it causes, Pandora will respond, not to destroy, but to survive. Taruk Makto is often spoken of as legend, as destiny given wings, but within Pandora's deeper logic, it is neither myth nor miracle. Taruk Makto is a function. It is the world's emergency response, activated only when balance approaches collapse. This role is not designed to create heroes. It does not exist to inspire faith or reverence. Instead, Taruk Makto emerges when the usual mechanisms of harmony fail, when dialogue breaks down, when cycles no longer correct themselves, and when fragmentation spreads too quickly. The system shifts into crisis mode. What appears sacred from the outside is at its core a biological and social override. In this emergency state, normal boundaries loosen. Individuals who would otherwise remain within rigid social structures are suddenly permitted to act beyond them. Authority becomes temporary and conditional, not inherited or permanent. The Taruk Makto is not chosen because they are virtuous, but because they can carry the weight of disruption long enough to redirect it. One of the defining features of this state is unification. Clans that normally exist apart, each shaped by its own biome, values and rhythms, pause their differences. This does not mean harmony is restored. It means conflict is postponed. Survival becomes the only priority. The system demands cooperation, not consensus. At the same time, the wider biosphere shifts. Predators, prey, terrain, and environmental patterns begin to align toward defense. This is not coordinated through command, but through synchronization. Pandora's network amplifies signals that favor resistance, containment, and resilience. The entire world leans inward, bracing itself. Taruk Makto appears under two primary conditions. The first is internal fracture, when divisions among the Na'vi escalate to the point where they threaten the stability of the whole. The second is external pressure, when foreign forces push beyond the system's capacity to absorb disruption. In both cases, Taruk Makto acts as a focal point, concentrating scattered responses into a single direction. Crucially, this state is not meant to last. Once the immediate threat subsides, the system begins to release tension, authority dissolves, alliances loosen, the world exhales, the old structures return, imperfect but familiar. The Taruk Makto does not rule, they recede. This impermanence is intentional. Emergency power, if extended, becomes imbalance itself. Pandora understands this instinctively. What saves the system in crisis could damage it in peace. For this reason, Toruk Makto is never a foundation. It is a bridge meant only to span catastrophe. Viewed through this lens, the Toruk Makto reveals Pandora's most pragmatic truth. Balance is not maintained through constant strength, nor through endless unity. It is maintained through timing. Intervention arrives only when necessary, and retreats once survival is secured. Within the broader narrative of Avatar, Toruk Makto is not the story of an individual rising above the world. It is the story of a world temporarily reshaping itself around an individual, then letting go, before that shape becomes a new source of fracture. Every living system has limits. Pandora is no exception. Balance is not infinite. It is conditional, responsive, and fragile when pressed for too long. Section 3.33 explores what happens when survival itself crosses a threshold and begins to damage the system it was meant to protect. At first, Pandora adapts. When disturbances remain small, the world adjusts quietly. Ecosystems shift away from pressure. Neural pathways reroute. Life learns to avoid what it cannot absorb. This is the system at its most graceful, flexible, patient, resilient. Disruption is treated as friction, not threat. But there is a line. When interference grows faster than adaptation, avoidance fails. Industrial force, amplified by technology, does not simply exist within Pandora. It multiplies impact. Extraction spreads outward, accelerating imbalance beyond local containment. At this point, Iwa no longer compensates indirectly. The response becomes direct. This escalation is not emotional, it is mechanical in its own way. When thresholds are exceeded, Pandora activates large-scale reflexes, coordinated reactions that move through the biosphere at once. What appears sudden is the result of long accumulation. The system has been measuring harm all along, yet the most unsettling consequence of prolonged pressure is not external reaction, it is internal distortion. The Ash people are not invaders, they are outcomes. They emerge where survival is stretched across generations, where scarcity and threat never fully recede. In such conditions, balance becomes a liability. Harmony feels slow, strength feels immediate. Over time, values recalibrate. What once preserved life is replaced by what enforces it. This is a system error, not a malfunction, but a side effect. When survival becomes absolute priority, memory loses usefulness. If the past offers no safety, it is discarded. Renewal becomes impossible because nothing is left long enough to regenerate. In its place rises dominance. Clear, forceful, decisive, power replaces harmony because power feels reliable. Here, fire becomes a defining symbol. It clears rather than nourishes. It leaves no record. It prevents return. Within this logic, erasure feels safer than patience. The future is secured not by continuity, but by control. Pandora allows this state to exist, not because it is right, not because it is just, but because for a time it persists. The system does not enforce virtue, it enforces viability. As long as an outcome does not immediately collapse the whole, it remains within tolerance. Neutrality, in this sense, is one of Pandora's most unsettling traits. This reframes the conflict entirely. The Ash people are not a corruption imposed from outside. They are proof that even a living, self-regulating world can produce values shaped by domination when pushed beyond recovery. The danger then is not invasion alone, but endurance without healing. Within Avatar, this threshold marks a turning point. The question is no longer whether Pandora can survive external pressure. It is whether survival, pursued without balance, transforms the system into something unrecognizable. When existence becomes nothing but persistence, memory burns away, renewal stops, and strength takes the place of harmony, and the world still alive continues, changed not because it chose this path, but because it was pushed there. Before the first ships arrived, Pandora existed in a long, unbroken rhythm. The Na'vi lived within stable cycles, not because they lacked curiosity, but because their world did not demand conquest. There was no pressure to accelerate, no need to dominate nature to survive it. Technology did not advance because biology already provided balance. Life moved slowly, confidently, knowing that tomorrow would resemble yesterday. Then the rhythm broke. With the arrival of humans in the era remembered as the first invasion, the conflict took on a new shape. Resources were no longer part of a living system. They became targets. The fall of Home Tree was not just a physical loss. It was a rupture in memory, a wound in the network that held generations together. Pandora responded, not with vengeance, but with unity. The world itself aligned in defense, as if a single body had tensed against an injury. Resistance was collective, instinctive, and immediate. When the dust settled, silence followed. The years that came after were neither peace nor war. They were a pause. In this 15-year gap, the world adjusted to absence and aftermath. Cultures began to blend, not seamlessly, but inevitably. Human ideas lingered, Na'vi traditions adapted. The Sully family emerged during this time, not as symbols of victory, but as evidence of transition. Children were born into a world that no longer remembered stability as absolute. They inherited both memory and uncertainty. Pandora learned to breathe again, but the breath was cautious. Then humanity returned, not as visitors, but as settlers. The era of colonization reshaped the conflict entirely. Bridgehead rose with unnatural speed, a city designed not to coexist, but to replace. Industry no longer skirted the edges of the world. It embedded itself at the core. At the same time, recombinant beings appeared, Na'vi bodies carrying human memory. The line between invader and native blurred, not through understanding, but through replication. At this point, the struggle shifted inward. No longer was the conflict defined solely by an external threat. Pandora began to fracture internally. Different responses to survival emerged. Some sought preservation, others chose adaptation, some leaned toward control. The world was no longer united by a single instinct. It was divided by competing interpretations of what survival should mean. As you rest with this timeline, allow it to slow. There is no need to judge each era or to decide which was right. Instead, notice the pattern. Stability gives way to disruption. Disruption creates change. Change, if left unresolved, turns inward. Breathe gently as you imagine these layers settling. A world before invasion, a world in resistance, a world learning to live with what has changed, and finally, a world questioning itself. In the unfolding journey of Avatar, time is not a straight line. It is a cycle of tension and release, memory and forgetting, And as Pandora continues to evolve, so does the question it quietly asks of everyone who enters it. Not whether you can survive here, but what survival will turn you into. Avatar does not ask who is right or who is wrong. It asks what happens when a world carries its wounds for too long, when strength drifts away from balance, when survival becomes an excuse for domination. As this journey comes to rest, Pandora continues to breathe, quietly and steadily. Iowa still remembers every step, every choice, every consequence, and somewhere within the ash and silence, the mirror remains, waiting to see which civilization will recognize itself first and choose what it will become.